Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to talk about something that sits quietly in the background of many relationships: silence. Not the peaceful kind that brings comfort, but the kind that erodes love, breaks trust, and chips away at the spirit of someone who only wants to be seen, heard, and understood. Silence in a relationship can be deeply damaging, far more than many people realize. At first, it may appear harmless, just space, a pause, a moment of reflection, but when silence becomes the default mode of communication, it no longer serves as a tool for peace. Instead, it becomes a weapon. A silent partner might not shout, argue, or insult, but their absence of words can speak louder than any confrontation. Silence creates distance, and when it stretches over time, it begins to erode the very foundation of connection and trust. In every relationship, communication is the bridge between two emotional worlds. It is through words that we understand each other's fears, needs, joys, and frustrations. Without that bridge, misunderstandings multiply. What starts as a simple, unresolved issue can grow into resentment, confusion, and emotional isolation. When one person stops talking, whether it's out of fear, fatigue, or pride, the other is left in a space filled with questions. What are they thinking? Do they still care? Are they angry or just indifferent? That uncertainty breeds anxiety and insecurity. And when silence persists, it forces the silent partner's counterpart to fill in the gaps, usually with the worst-case scenarios. For the one left in the dark, silence feels like rejection. It's not just about the absence of words, it's about the absence of emotional presence. They begin to question themselves. Did I do something wrong? Why won't they talk to me? Is it even worth trying anymore? This internal dialogue becomes exhausting and painful. Over time, the silent treatment is no longer seen as space or patience. It becomes a symbol of emotional neglect. Even if love still exists, the lack of expression makes it hard to feel. Furthermore, silence can create a power imbalance. The one who withholds communication often ends up controlling the emotional tempo of the relationship. Their refusal to engage forces the other person to either chase after answers or give up entirely. This imbalance can be subtle, but it is damaging. It puts one person in a position of dominance and the other in a position of emotional dependency. Healthy relationships require mutual respect and effort, and silence can quietly destroy that balance. What makes silence particularly dangerous is its quiet nature. Unlike overt conflict, which is obvious and often addressed quickly, silence can linger unnoticed. Partners may go days, weeks, or even years suppressing issues, pretending things are fine when they are not. This slow erosion can be more destructive than a single fight. It becomes the norm, and with each passing day, emotional distance grows. Eventually, one or both partners may stop trying altogether, not because they no longer care, but because they no longer believe they'll be heard. Another layer of damage comes from emotional suppression. When someone chooses silence, they often push down their true feelings. This internal pressure can lead to emotional burnout, resentment, and even mental health struggles. On the other side, the person who wants to communicate may begin to feel like a burden, ashamed of needing connection. The relationship slowly shifts from being a source of comfort to a source of stress. Ultimately, silence is not neutral. It carries meaning. In a relationship, it can mean avoidance, indifference, fear, or punishment. When left unchecked, it becomes a language of pain. Words, even hard ones, have the power to heal, clarify, and reconnect. But silence, when it replaces communication, becomes the slow unraveling of intimacy. What starts as a quiet moment can end in emotional abandonment. And the longer that silence lasts, the more damage it does, not just to the relationship, but to the people within it. Prolonged lack of communication causes emotional erosion in a relationship, often in ways that are slow, quiet, and deeply painful. At first, it may not seem like much: missed conversations, unanswered texts, or awkward silences during dinner, but over time, the absence of open, honest dialogue creates a growing emotional distance that chips away at the bond between two people. Relationships are built on connection, and communication is the primary tool through which that connection is sustained. When that tool is neglected, the structure begins to weaken. even if it appears stable on the surface. Emotional erosion doesn't happen in a dramatic, obvious way. It begins with small misunderstandings that go unspoken, feelings that are swallowed instead of shared, and issues that are brushed aside rather than addressed. In the beginning, one partner might make excuses, they're just tired, or it's not the right time to bring this up. But as the silence stretches, those excuses wear thin, and the emotional impact starts to set in. The person who feels unheard or dismissed begins to question their importance in the relationship. They may start wondering if their thoughts, feelings, or needs even matter. This internal conflict creates emotional strain that slowly erodes self-esteem and trust. When communication is absent, assumptions take its place. Without clear, honest conversation, both partners begin to make guesses about what the other is thinking or feeling. These assumptions are often colored by fear, insecurity, or past pain, leading to negative interpretations. One might assume their partner is angry, disinterested, or falling out of love, even if that isn't the case. This guessing game creates emotional turmoil, as the lack of clarity leaves room for doubt and misinterpretation. Instead of drawing closer, the partners drift further apart, each stuck in their own emotional narrative. In the silence, emotional needs go unmet. A partner may crave reassurance, understanding, or even just daily companionship, but without communication, those needs remain invisible. Over time, this unmet emotional hunger breeds frustration and resentment. The person who longs for connection may begin to feel like they're asking for too much, or worse, that they're not worthy of being cared for. They may withdraw as a defense mechanism, creating even more distance in the relationship. It becomes a vicious cycle. One partner is silent, the other feels neglected, and pulls away, which reinforces the silence even more. This erosion doesn't just affect how people feel, it changes how they behave. As emotional connection fades, warmth, kindness, and intimacy often follow. Partners may stop doing the small, loving things they once did. Physical affection may decrease. Shared moments become rare or superficial. When communication disappears, it's not just the words that are missing, it's the energy, attention, and emotional presence that come with them. The relationship begins to feel hollow, like a shell of what it used to be. People may stay physically close, but feel emotionally miles apart. The long-term effects of this emotional erosion can be devastating. What started as a loving partnership can turn into a cold coexistence. In some cases, one or both partners may stop trying altogether. The emotional exhaustion from being unheard or misunderstood eventually numbs the desire to connect. Even if love still lingers, it becomes buried under layers of hurt, frustration, and silence. At this stage, rebuilding the connection becomes much harder, because the emotional damage has already taken a toll. In the end, communication is not just a tool for resolving conflict, it's the lifeline of emotional intimacy. Without it, the connection withers. The longer a couple goes without truly talking, listening, and understanding each other, the more their emotional foundation crumbles. What remains is a relationship filled with unspoken words, unmet needs, and a deep sense of loneliness that no one ever intended, but silence allowed to grow. Silence is not protection, it's avoidance. Many people convince themselves that by staying silent, they are shielding their partner from pain, conflict, or disappointment. They believe that if they don't speak up, they can avoid an argument, preserve peace, or prevent emotional damage. But in truth, that silence often does far more harm than good. It becomes a barrier rather than a shield. It doesn't protect the relationship, it pushes it into emotional stagnation, where unresolved feelings quietly build, until they erupt, or dissolve everything in their path. Avoiding difficult conversations might feel easier in the moment, especially when emotions are running high or the fear of hurting someone is strong. It's tempting to retreat, to swallow your thoughts, to pretend everything is fine. But silence doesn't make the problem go away, it just delays it, and gives it time to grow in complexity. What could have been resolved through honest communication becomes tangled in assumptions, resentment, and emotional distance. Over time, this avoidance becomes a habit, a way of functioning in the relationship, that undermines the very trust and openness it aims to protect. When one person chooses silence, the other is often left in a state of confusion and emotional uncertainty. They can sense something is off even if no words have been spoken. Silence carries weight. It has a tone, a presence. It can be louder than words, because it forces the other person to guess what's wrong, to read between the lines, to question their own instinct. That guessing game can be deeply damaging, especially for someone who craves clarity and connection. It turns love into a puzzle instead of a partnership. Avoidance also signals fear, fear of confrontation, of vulnerability, of emotional exposure. But relationships thrive on vulnerability. It is in those raw, uncomfortable moments that real intimacy is formed. When you speak honestly, even about painful things, you're showing your partner that you care enough to be real, to be imperfect, to risk discomfort for the sake of truth. Silence, on the other hand, tells your partner that they are not worth that risk, that it's safer to shut down than to open up. That message, whether intended or not, hurts. Moreover, silence builds walls. Each time a person chooses not to say what they truly feel, another brick is added. Over time, those walls become so high that real connection becomes almost impossible. The relationship becomes a space where both people operate behind their own defenses, avoiding not just conflict, but also closeness. The emotional distance becomes more pronounced. Touch fades. Conversations become shallow. Eye contact is avoided. Love still might exist, but it's buried under layers of unspoken truths and emotional withdrawal. It's also important to recognize that silence can be used as a form of control or punishment. When someone deliberately withholds communication to express disapproval or to assert power, it's not just avoidance, it's manipulation. This kind of silence isn't passive, it's aggressive in its own way. It leaves the other person feeling powerless and desperate for resolution, reinforcing a cycle where one partner chases and the other retreats. That dynamic corrodes equality and safety in the relation. Ultimately, silence doesn't keep things from falling apart. It often helps things fall apart faster. Real protection in a relationship comes from being honest, even when it's hard. It comes from choosing to face difficult emotions together rather than alone. It comes from understanding that discomfort is temporary, but emotional avoidance leaves lasting scars. When silence replaces expression, what is being protected isn't the relationship, it's a fragile illusion of peace that will eventually shatter under the weight of everything left unsaid. Emotional withdrawal creates a one-sided emotional burden that quietly strains the balance of a relationship. When one partner begins to pull back emotionally, whether through silence, disinterest, or detachment, the other is left to carry the full weight of the emotional labor required to sustain the connection. This imbalance is not always visible at first, but its effects are profound and long-lasting. Relationships are partnerships in which both individuals are meant to share the work of understanding, nurturing, and supporting one another. When that balance is disrupted by emotional withdrawal, one person is left reaching, while the other remains out of reach. The partner who remains emotionally present begins to feel a growing sense of loneliness, even while physically sharing space with the other person. Conversations become one-sided. Affection feels unreciprocated. Efforts to connect are met with indifference or cold responses. It is exhausting to keep trying when there is little or no response. The emotionally invested partner may question what they did wrong, or why their love suddenly feels like it isn't enough. This constant effort to bridge the growing distance can create emotional fatigue, as they become both the giver and the seeker in the relation. Over time, this imbalance chips away at self-worth. When someone is constantly reaching out only to be met with emotional vacancy, they begin to internalize the silence as rejection. Even if the withdrawal wasn't meant to be hurtful, the message it sends is that their feelings are not valued, that their presence is not appreciated. This kind of pain is subtle but sharp. It doesn't arrive through loud arguments or visible conflict, but through persistent emotional absence that slowly makes the relationship feel hollow. What makes emotional withdrawal even more difficult is that it often goes unacknowledged. The partner who pulls back might justify their behavior as needing space, feeling overwhelmed, or simply being tired. While these are valid feelings, they can become excuses when used to consistently avoid connection. Emotional withdrawal is not just about being quiet, it is about withholding warmth, vulnerability, and shared intimacy. It's the closing of a door not just to conflict, but to closeness. Meanwhile, the partner left carrying the emotional burden often feels like they are walking on eggshells. They try harder to please, avoid conflict, and suppress their own needs in the hope of restoring balance. This self-sacrificing behavior may keep the relationship functioning on the surface, but underneath it builds quiet resentment and deep sadness. The burden becomes heavier with each unreturned gesture, unanswered question, and unmet need. The danger of this dynamic is that it can become a pattern. The more one partner withdraws, the more the other compensates. The more the other compensates, the more the withdrawing partner retreats. Eventually, the emotionally present partner may reach a breaking point, not from a single incident, but from the accumulation of emotional neglect. They may stop trying altogether, not out of anger but out of exhaustion. When this happens, the relationship often collapses, not with a dramatic end, but with quiet resignation. Emotional withdrawal is not always intentional, but its consequences are very real. It leaves one person feeling like they are in a relationship alone, trying to love for two people instead of one. Love cannot thrive in that environment. It needs mutual investment, shared vulnerability, and consistent emotional presence. When one person checks out emotionally, the other is forced to either carry the burden or let it fall. Neither choice is fair and neither leads to true connection. The emotional gap only widens until both hearts feel the emptiness that silence and distance create. Speaking up, even imperfectly, is vital in any relationship, because communication is the foundation of understanding, trust, and emotional closeness. Many people hesitate to express their feelings out of fear of being misunderstood, judged, or starting conflict. They worry that if they don't have the perfect words, it's better to say nothing at all. But silence is far more damaging than imperfect speech. Choosing to speak, even if the message comes out messy or emotional, shows a willingness to engage, to try, and to care. It shows that the relationship matters enough to risk vulnerability. No one has all the right words all the time. Emotions are complex, and articulating them clearly can be difficult, especially when dealing with hurt, disappointment, or confusion. But waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect way to say something often means waiting too long. In that waiting, distance grows, misunderstandings take root, the other person is left to guess what's wrong, and those guesses are usually worse than the truth. A clumsy attempt to communicate is still far better than no attempt at all, because it opens a door. It starts a conversation that can be shaped, refined, and deepened over time. Speaking up also affirms your value within the relation. It's a way of saying, I matter, and so does what I feel. Suppressing your thoughts out of fear or discomfort often leads to resentment. Over time, the weight of all those unsaid words builds into frustration and emotional disconnection. What could have been addressed early with a few honest, even awkward words, eventually turns into a wall of silence. That wall becomes harder to break down the longer it stands. When you speak, even without perfect clarity, you prevent that wall from being built in the first place. Furthermore, imperfect communication humanizes you. It lets your partner see your struggle and your effort. There's honesty in stumbling over your words or admitting that you're not exactly sure how to say what you feel. It shows that you're willing to be real, not just composed or careful. That kind of openness invites empathy. It gives the other person permission to speak just as imperfectly, to meet you in that vulnerable space, without the pressure to perform emotional perfection. Relationships deepen when both people feel free to express themselves honestly, without fear of being criticized for not saying it right. Avoiding communication out of fear of saying the wrong thing also denies the other person the chance to grow with you. It assumes that they won't understand or that they'll react badly, but more often than not, people are more receptive than we give them credit for, especially when they can see that the intention behind the words is love, concern, or hope. Speaking imperfectly is still a form of emotional courage. It's a declaration that your feelings are real, your experiences are valid, and your relationship is worth the effort. Even when speaking up leads to discomfort, it's often a necessary discomfort that clears the air. The tension of unspoken truths is far more damaging than the temporary awkwardness of a difficult conversation, and once something is said out loud, it can be addressed, explored, and worked through. Progress doesn't come from avoiding tension, it comes from moving through it together. Words don't have to be polished to be powerful, they just need to be honest. Ultimately, speaking up, even imperfectly, builds a relationship that is grounded in truth rather than assumptions. It fosters mutual respect and shows both partners that their voices are safe and valued. It creates a space where love can be real, not just idealized, because love isn't about saying things perfectly, it's about saying them sincerely, and often, empathy and vulnerability are often misunderstood as weaknesses, but in truth, they are profound sources of strength. In a world that frequently rewards emotional distance, control, and self-protection, choosing to feel deeply and express openly is an act of immense courage. Empathy allows us to connect with others beyond surface-level interactions, offering understanding, compassion, and support in ways that foster trust and emotional intimacy. Vulnerability, meanwhile, is the gateway to authenticity. It is the willingness to be seen as we truly are, with our flaws, fears, and hopes exposed. Together, these qualities do not make a person fragile, they make them deeply human and powerfully connected. Empathy is the capacity to step into another person's emotional world, to feel what they feel, and respond with care. It requires the strength to set aside one's own perspective long enough to truly listen and understand. This is not always easy. It demands patience, humility, and a willingness to be emotionally present. But when practiced, empathy bridges the emotional gaps that so often cause misunderstandings or conflicts. It says, I see you, I hear you, and your feelings matter. In relationships, this kind of validation is invaluable. It creates a safe space where people can share openly, knowing they will not be judged or dismissed. Vulnerability is equally powerful. It is not about oversharing or being emotionally exposed at all times, but about choosing honesty over pretense. When someone says, I'm scared, or I don't have all the answers, they are showing a level of self-awareness and bravery that invites real connection. Vulnerability disarms defensiveness. It opens the door to mutual understanding and invites others to let their guard down too. Far from being a weakness, this kind of openness requires inner strength, the kind that resists the temptation to hide behind indifference or control. Both empathy and vulnerability are essential in forming deep, meaningful relationships. Without empathy, people feel alone, even when surrounded by others. Without vulnerability, relationships remain superficial, lacking the emotional depth that sustains true closeness. These qualities allow love, trust, and understanding to flourish. They allow for difficult conversations to be had, without fear of emotional shutdown. They also allow for forgiveness, as both partners learn to see each other as imperfect but trying. In this way, empathy and vulnerability are not just emotional traits, they are relational skills that strengthen bonds and promote healing. Moreover, these strengths extend beyond personal relations. In leadership, empathy fosters trust and loyalty, while vulnerability makes leaders more relatable and respected. In times of conflict, empathy helps people see beyond their own pain and consider others' experiences, paving the way for resolution and growth. In everyday life, practicing vulnerability can lead to greater self-acceptance and personal freedom. When people stop hiding behind masks of perfection, they begin to live more authentically, drawing closer to the kind of life and connections they truly want. The path of empathy and vulnerability is not always easy. It exposes us to rejection, misunderstanding, and emotional discomfort, but it also makes joy more vibrant, love more real, and connection more meaningful. It teaches resilience, the ability to feel deeply and still keep going, to be hurt and still stay open. That is true strength. In a world that often encourages emotional armor, choosing softness and openness is a radical act of strength. It says, I will not be, I will feel, and I will keep showing up. That is the power of empathy. That is the courage of vulnerability. And together, they build lives and relationships that are not just strong, but deeply alive.